When Ethan Moretti pushed the divorce papers across the polished black marble table, he believed he was removing the final flaw from an otherwise perfect life. The luxury real estate billionaire had spent years building an empire of glass towers, private airfields, elite connections, and magazine cover success. In his mind, his quiet wife no longer belonged in that future, so he offered her everything he thought she would need to disappear. $20 million. A penthouse overlooking the Mediterranean, luxury vehicles, lifetime financial security, a generous goodbye package for a woman he believed had contributed very little to the world he had created. Ethan expected tears. He expected questions. Maybe even a desperate attempt to save the marriage. Instead, Sophia Romano picked up the pen. Her hands never trembled. She read every page, signed every document, then calmly pushed most of the settlement papers back toward him. Keep it. The room went silent. His parents exchanged confused looks. His attorneys stopped taking notes. Even the crystal chandelier above the table seemed frozen in place. Sophia stood, thanked everyone for their time, then walked out of the mansion without looking back. Ethan watched her leave and felt something dangerously close to relief. He believed he had finally won his freedom. What he didn't know was that Sophia Romano was not the ordinary woman everyone believed her to be. She was the secret daughter of Vincenzo Romano, the most feared Mafia Boss in Europe. And by the time the ink on those divorce papers dried, every invisible hand that had protected Ethan's empire for years had already begun to withdraw. The destruction of Ethan Moretti had started long before he realized he was in danger. 3 nights before the divorce became official, the Moretti estate hosted one of the most exclusive gatherings in the country. Politicians mingled beside billionaire investors. Developers discussed international projects over imported champagne. Private security teams guarded every entrance. The estate itself stretched across acres of coastline, a monument to Ethan's success. At the center of it all stood Ethan Moretti, 42 years old, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored midnight suit. Confident in the way only powerful men become after years of hearing the word yes. He moved through the room surrounded by executives, celebrities, and business leaders who treated him less like a businessman and more like royalty. To them, Ethan was untouchable, the self-made billionaire who transformed a struggling construction company into a global luxury real estate empire. The man who always won. Standing far outside that orbit was Sophia. While designer gowns glittered beneath crystal chandeliers and diamonds flashed beneath expensive lights, Sophia wore a simple ivory silk blouse and understated jewelry. Nothing about her demanded attention, and yet she possessed the kind of quiet elegance that never needed it. Most guests barely noticed her. Those who did often reached the same conclusion. She was the wife Ethan had outgrown, the woman who married him before the money, the woman who never adapted to the elite world surrounding him. Some whispered she was too quiet. Others called her forgettable. A few openly wondered how long Ethan would keep her around. What none of them understood was that Sophia's simplicity was a choice. The delicate necklace resting against her collarbone had belonged to generations of the Romano family. The security vehicle waiting outside belonged to an organization more powerful than most governments would ever admit. And the woman they dismissed as ordinary was, in reality, Sophia Romano, the only daughter of Vincenzo Romano, a name spoken carefully in political offices, corporate boardrooms, and criminal circles across Europe. The Romano Empire did not appear on public rankings. It did not seek media attention. It did not need headlines. Its influence stretched through shipping ports, construction conglomerates, security corporations, casinos, financial institutions, and networks powerful enough to alter the fortunes of billionaires with a single decision. For years, Sophia had hidden that truth from Ethan. She wanted a normal life, a real marriage, a husband who loved her without knowing who her father was. What she never imagined was that the man she chose would one day hand her divorce papers and unknowingly declare war on the very family that had been protecting him all along. And to understand how Ethan Moretti's empire began to crumble, we have to start with the daughter. Vincenzo Romano hid from the world. Ethan Moretti believes he just removed the final obstacle from his perfect life. But what he doesn't know is that the woman he discarded is hiding a secret powerful enough to destroy everything he has built. If you were in Ethan's position, would you have underestimated Sophia too? Let me know in the comments and stay with me, because the phone call she just made is about to change everything. The private jet crossed the Mediterranean beneath a blanket of darkness. Far below, scattered lights glittered along the Italian coastline. Inside the cabin, Sophia Romano sat alone. The divorce papers were final. For the first time in 10 years, there was nothing connecting her to Ethan Moretti except memories, most of them painful. She stared through the window without speaking. Hours earlier, she had walked out of the mansion she once called home. Now she was returning to the one place she had spent years trying to escape, the Romano estate. Hidden deep within the rolling hills of southern Italy, protected by forests, mountains, and enough armed security to defend a small nation. As dawn approached, the jet landed on a private runway owned by Romano Holdings. A convoy of black armored vehicles waited beside the aircraft. Security personnel stood at attention. Their expressions remained emotionless, yet every one of them straightened the moment Sophia appeared. Not because she demanded respect, because they knew exactly who she was. The daughter Vincenzo Romano had hidden from the world. The convoy moved through iron gates nearly 20 feet high. Beyond them stood the Romano estate. Ancient stone walls stretched across the hillside. Guard towers overlooked every approach. Armed patrols moved with military precision. The estate looked less like a residence and more like a fortress built to survive a war. At its center stood a sprawling villa that had belonged to the Romano family for generations. Power lived here, not the kind displayed in magazines or stock markets. Older power, deeper power, the kind that moved governments without ever appearing in public. Inside the villa, dozens of advisors, security chiefs, and executives waited in silence. No one spoke above a whisper. Because Vincenzo Romano was inside, and when Vincenzo Romano was displeased, wise people became very careful. At 68 years old, Vincenzo remained one of the most feared men in Europe. His empire extended across continents. Shipping companies controlled major Mediterranean routes. Construction conglomerates operated in dozens of countries. Private security firms protected politicians, executives, and foreign dignitaries. Casinos generated billions. Smuggling networks moved products through channels government struggled to monitor. Even people who had never met him understood one simple rule: do not become Vincenzo Romano's enemy. The consequences rarely arrived quickly, but they always arrived. This morning, however, the feared Mafia Boss was not sitting in a boardroom. He stood alone in a private garden overlooking the estate. An unfinished cup of coffee rested beside him. His gaze remained fixed on the approaching convoy. When the vehicle carrying Sophia stopped, something changed in his expression. The ruthless businessman disappeared. The feared Mafia Boss vanished. For a brief moment, he became nothing more than a father. Sophia stepped from the vehicle. Neither spoke. Then Vincenzo crossed the courtyard and wrapped his arms around his daughter. The staff immediately looked away. Few people on earth had ever seen Vincenzo Romano embrace anyone. For several moments, neither moved. Finally, Sophie whispered, "It's over." Vincenzo nodded slowly. "I know." His voice sounded heavier than usual. Older. His voice sounded heavier than usual. Older. The news had reached him less than an hour after Ethan signed the papers. Nothing involving Sophia stayed hidden from him for long. Not because he controlled her, because he had never stopped protecting her. Years ago, Sophia had shocked the entire Romano family by leaving. She hated the violence, hated the fear that followed their name, hated living inside a world where every conversation carried consequences. She wanted something simple, something real. Then she met Ethan Moretti, a young entrepreneur with ambition in his eyes and dreams larger than his bank account. For the first time, Sophia believed she had found someone who loved her rather than the power surrounding her family. So she left, and Vincenzo let her go. Many people advised him against it. Some called it weakness. Others warned that she would eventually regret abandoning her inheritance. Vincenzo ignored them all, because Sophia was the only thing in his life he valued more than power. If she wanted freedom, he would give it to her, even if it broke his heart. But freedom never meant abandonment. Throughout her marriage, Vincenzo watched from a distance, quietly, carefully. invisible to everyone except a handful of trusted advisors, including Ethan, especially Ethan. Later that morning, Sophia sat with her father inside his private office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate. Senior advisors filled the room. Financial directors, security chiefs, corporate executives, every one of them understood the significance of this meeting. Vincenzo opened a file and placed it on the table. Inside were hundreds of pages, records, approvals, contracts, partnerships, evidence. Sophia studied the documents. Her expression slowly changed. These are Ethan's projects. Vincenzo nodded. Some of them. Another advisor slid forward additional files. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. And suddenly Sophia understood. Critical construction permits that should have taken years. Approved. Government investigations that disappeared without explanation. Gone. Aggressive competitors that unexpectedly withdrew from negotiations. Renewed. Investors who appeared exactly when Ethan needed them most. Connected. For 10 years, invisible hands had quietly protected Ethan Moretti. Not because of his brilliance, not because of his influence, because Sophia loved him, and Vincenzo loved Sophia. The realization left her speechless. "I never asked for this," she said quietly. "I know." "Then why?" Vincenzo leaned back, his eyes softened. "Because every father protects his daughter." Silence filled the room. Sophia lowered her gaze. For years she had believed Ethan built everything alone. Now she understood the truth. He had been helped far more than either of them realized. Not through favoritism, through protection. Protection that no longer existed. Vincenzo slowly closed the final folder. The room became very still. Everyone sensed a decision approaching, one that would change lives far beyond Italy. He looked toward his advisors. His voice remained calm, controlled, almost gentle. "Remove every favor we ever extended." The words were simple. No threats, no anger, no promises of revenge. Just an instruction, yet the effect was immediate. Several executives exchanged nervous glances. One security chief lowered his eyes. The financial director quietly exhaled. Everyone understood what the order truly meant. The invisible shield surrounding Ethan Moretti was gone, not destroyed, simply withdrawn. For the first time in years, he would face the world without Romano protection, and the world could be merciless. Vincenzo stood. The meeting was over. Around the table, advisors immediately reached for phones. Laptops opened. Messages were drafted. Secure communication lines activated. Across Italy, instructions began moving through networks few people knew existed. Within minutes, calls crossed borders. London, Paris, Berlin, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. Across Europe and America, powerful people answered ringing phones. Some listened carefully. Others asked no questions at all, because when instructions came from the Romano network, explanations were rarely necessary. Far away, Ethan Moretti raised a glass of champagne at a luxury rooftop celebration, completely unaware that his world had just begun to change. And across 2 continents, the first pieces of his empire were already starting to move out of place. A week later, Ethan Moretti felt better than he had in years. The divorce was finalized. The lawyers had completed the paperwork. The settlement funds had been transferred. The chapter called Sophia was officially over. Or so he believed. Standing on the rooftop terrace of one of his newest luxury developments overlooking Manhattan, Ethan raised a glass of champagne while photographers snapped pictures from every angle. Below him stretched a city of steel, glass, and ambition. A city he believed belonged to men like him. Successful men, powerful men, men who took what they wanted. Beside him stood Isabella Hart, tall, glamorous, and effortlessly elegant. Everything Ethan's social circle considered sophisticated. Her arm rested comfortably around his waist as reporters asked questions about his newest acquisition. A smile never left Ethan's face. For the first time in years, he felt free. No more quiet dinners. No more awkward conversations. No more wife who seemed completely uninterested in the world he had built. Now he could finally live the life he deserved. Or at least, the life he thought he deserved. "To new beginnings," Isabella said, lifting her glass. Ethan smirked. "To bigger things." The guests applauded. Champagne flowed. Cameras flashed. And somewhere thousands of miles away, the first domino quietly fell. 2 days later, Ethan sat in the executive boardroom of Moretti Holdings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. Around the table sat his senior leadership team. Normally, these meetings were celebrations. Today felt different. His chief financial officer cleared his throat. There may be an issue. Ethan barely looked up from his tablet. What kind of issue? The Vanguard East Consortium has withdrawn. That got his attention. Ethan slowly lowered the tablet. The consortium behind the Dubai project. The CFO nodded. Yes. A silence settled across the room. The project represented nearly $800 million in projected revenue. The consortium had spent 18 months negotiating. The contracts were nearly finalized. 18 months of work doesn't disappear overnight, Ethan said. Did they give a reason? The CFO hesitated. No, none. They simply withdrew. Ethan leaned back. Annoyance flickered across his face. Nothing more. Large deals collapsed sometimes. It happened. We'll replace them. The room relaxed slightly. The meeting continued. Ethan forgot about the withdrawal within an hour. 3 days later, another problem arrived. This one was harder to ignore. His legal department informed him that a major government permit for a luxury waterfront development had been delayed indefinitely. The permit should have been routine. Every requirement had been satisfied, every inspection completed, every signature obtained. Yet somehow the approval process had suddenly stopped. Ethan immediately called several political contacts. None could provide answers. Some sounded strangely uncomfortable. Others seemed eager to end the conversation. By the end of the day, Ethan was irritated, but not concerned. Not yet. Then the bank called. The following morning, Ethan arrived at his office expecting routine updates. Instead, he found 3 missed calls from one of the largest financial institutions in North America. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, Ethan stared at the phone in disbelief. The bank had paused financing on 2 major projects, temporarily, pending further review. Further review. He repeated the phrase aloud after hanging up. The projects had already been approved. The financing packages had already been structured. Nothing had changed. Yet somehow, everything had changed. For the first time, a small crack appeared in Ethan's confidence. Still, he dismissed it. Bad timing. Bad luck. Nothing more. That explanation lasted exactly 48 hours. Then the acquisition collapsed. For 6 months, Moretti Holdings had pursued a European construction company that would significantly expand Ethan's influence overseas. Negotiations were complete. Lawyers had finalized documentation. Board approvals were secured. The deal was essentially done, until it wasn't. Without warning, the company's leadership terminated discussions. No explanation, no counteroffer, no attempt to renegotiate. They simply walked away. The news exploded through financial circles. Questions began appearing. Analysts expressed concern. Investors demanded answers. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself explaining failure instead of success, and he hated it. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation worsened. Much worse. Construction projects slowed unexpectedly. Material supplies suddenly experienced delays. Shipping schedules changed without warning. Permits stalled. Inspection approvals vanished into bureaucratic limbo. One international partner stopped answering emails. Another cancelled meeting. A third quietly terminated a decade-long relationship. The pattern made no sense. Every problem appeared unrelated. Yet together they created something far more dangerous. Momentum. And momentum worked both ways. Success attracted success. Failure attracted failure. Soon rumors began spreading. Investors whispered. Competitors grew bolder. Journalists started asking uncomfortable questions. Inside Moretti Holdings, anxiety replaced confidence. Board members who once praised Ethan's leadership suddenly demanded detailed reports. Executives who previously agreed with everything he said became cautious. Meetings grew tense. Conversations became shorter. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Something was wrong. The only question was what? 3 weeks after the divorce, Ethan finally ordered a full internal investigation. The conference room filled with analysts, attorneys, financial experts, and risk consultants. Dozens of reports covered the table. Charts illuminated large screens. The atmosphere felt more like a crisis meeting than a business review. Ethan stood at the front of the room. "I want answers." Nobody spoke. His gaze swept across the executives. Someone explain why everything is suddenly falling apart. The head of corporate strategy adjusted his glasses. "We've spent the last 10 days examining every affected deal." And the executive hesitated. "There's a pattern." The room grew quiet. "What pattern?" The executive exchanged a glance with another analyst. Then he displayed a complicated network map on the screen. Dozens of names appeared. Investment firms, shipping companies, construction groups, law offices, political consultants, private equity funds. The connection stretched across multiple countries. Ethan frowned. "What am I looking at?" "Influence pathways." "What does that mean?" "It means every failed deal traces back to the same network." Ethan folded his arms. "What network?" The analyst pointed toward the center of the chart. One name sat at the intersection of dozens of connections. Not a person, a word. Romano. The room remained silent. Ethan stared at the screen. "Romano." The analyst nodded. "We don't fully understand it yet." "What is it?" "A private influence network." "Owned by who?" "We're still investigating." Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. The tension in the room made the reaction seem almost absurd. "So we're blaming some mystery organization?" "No, sir." "Then what are you saying?" The analyst swallowed. "We're saying every significant obstacle we've encountered appears connected to entities associated with the same network." For the first time, Ethan stopped smiling. Something about the explanation bothered him. Not because it sounded impossible, because it sounded strangely familiar. Romano. The name lingered in his mind. Sophia's surname. A coincidence? It had to be. Millions of people shared the same last name. Yet the uneasy feeling refused to disappear. That evening, Ethan remained in his office long after everyone left. The city lights glowed beyond the windows. Rain tapped softly against the glass. He stared at the network report for nearly an hour. Romano, Romano, Romano. The name appeared everywhere. Then a voice interrupted his thoughts. "May I say something?" Ethan looked up. Richard Lawson stood in the doorway. 72 years old, former chairman, senior advisor, one of the few people in the company old enough not to fear Ethan, of course. Richard entered slowly. His expression was thoughtful, concerned. He glanced at the report, then at Ethan. "How well did you know your wife?" Ethan frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "A serious one." Richard pulled out a chair. For several moments neither spoke. Finally, the older man asked quietly, "Who exactly was Sophia Romano?" Ethan laughed. The sound echoed through the office. "My wife? Yes. She was a teacher before we met." Richard said nothing. She hated attention. Still nothing. She barely attended social events. Richard continued watching him. The silence became uncomfortable. Ethan's smile slowly faded. "What are you getting at?" The older man leaned back. "I've been in business for 50 years. So, I've learned something." "What?" Richard looked toward the report. "Nothing this coordinated happens by accident." Ethan said nothing. Richard stood. Then he delivered one final sentence before leaving. "Find out who your wife really was." The door closed. Ethan remained alone. For the first time since the divorce, doubt entered his mind. Not a strong doubt. Not yet. Just enough to be dangerous. The next morning, a confidential package arrived on Ethan's desk. No return address. No explanation. Only a red stamp marked PR fate. He opened it immediately. Inside sat a thick investigative report. His security division had finally completed a background review of the Romano network. Ethan flipped through pages of financial data, corporate records, international connections, ownership structures. Then he reached a photograph and froze. The image had clearly been taken from a distance. A private estate, armed security personnel, several luxury vehicles. Standing near the center of the photograph was Sophia, his ex-wife. There was no mistake. The same dark hair, the same calm expression, the same woman who had signed divorce papers without shedding a tear. Standing beside her was an older man, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, commanding. Even in a photograph, power seemed to radiate from him. Below the image sat a typed caption, 3 words, Vincenzo Romano. Ethan stared at the page. His heartbeat slowed, then accelerated. He read the name again and again. The room suddenly felt smaller. The silence felt heavier. A terrible possibility began forming in his mind, one he wasn't ready to believe, one he desperately hoped wasn't true, because if Sofia Romano was connected to Vincenzo Romano, then everything Ethan thought he knew about his marriage might have been a lie. And if the report was correct, his problems were only beginning. Ethan Moretti stared at the photograph long after everyone else had gone home. The image lay on his desk beneath the glow of a single lamp. Sofia, Vincenzo Romano, standing side by side. Not as strangers, not as acquaintances, as family. The possibility seemed absurd, and yet the evidence sitting in front of him was impossible to ignore. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Fear, not panic, not terror, just the uncomfortable realization that he might be standing at the edge of a truth he did not want to discover. He reached for the phone. Bring everyone in. Within 24 hours, Moretti Holdings launched the largest private investigation in company history. Corporate intelligence firms were hired. Financial analysts were retained. Private investigators were dispatched across Europe. Former government officials were consulted. No expense was spared. Ethan wanted answers, and he wanted them immediately. The deeper they dug, the worse the truth became. Then Andestera's secure conference room reviewing the first wave of findings. His lead investigator projected documents onto a massive screen. Corporate ownership records, private trust agreements, financial structures hidden beneath layers of shell companies. The investigator adjusted his glasses. What we're about to show you has been verified through multiple independent sources. Ethan folded his arms. Ethan folded his arms. The screen changed. A series of names appeared. Investment groups, construction funds, private equity firms, international lenders, one after another. Every single one connected back to Romano-controlled entities. The investigator continued. Several investors responsible for financing Moretti Holdings projects were indirectly linked to Romano interests. Ethan frowned. How many? The investigator hesitated. More than half. The room went silent. Ethan stared at the screen. That couldn't be right. His company had relationships with hundreds of investors, dozens of institutions, thousands of stakeholders, yet the evidence kept growing. Every report pointed in the same direction. Romano, Romano, Romano. The names seemed to appear everywhere. The investigator clicked another file. This project received unusual regulatory assistance. Another click. This acquisition received political support. Another. This environmental investigation was quietly resolved. Another. This lawsuit disappeared before reaching court. The room became painfully quiet. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Years of business victories suddenly looked different. Every success he once claimed as proof of his brilliance now carried a question mark. How much of it had truly been his, and how much had come from invisible protection he never knew existed? The next report was worse, far worse. A financial analyst stepped forward. Mr. Moretti, we discovered several instances where competitors abruptly withdrew from bidding wars. Ethan remembered them. At the time, he had considered it proof of his reputation, his dominance, his negotiating skill. The analyst continued. In multiple cases, those competitors received communications from entities associated with Romano Holdings shortly before withdrawing. Ethan's jaw tightened. Are you saying they were pressured? We can't prove that. But the analyst swallowed. The timing is difficult to ignore. A heavy silence settled over the room. For years, Ethan had believed the world feared him. Now it appeared the world may have feared someone standing quietly behind him. Someone he had never bothered to understand. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The reports sat spread across his penthouse dining table. He poured himself a drink, then another, but neither helped. His mind kept returning to Sofia, to moments he had ignored, moments that suddenly felt very different. A memory surfaced 3 years earlier. A major construction dispute threatened one of his largest developments. The situation looked hopeless. Millions were at risk. Then, almost overnight, the issue disappeared. Ethan had celebrated his legal team's brilliance. Now he remembered Sophia's strange reaction. She hadn't seemed surprised. She hadn't even asked questions. At the time, he thought she simply didn't understand business. Now he wasn't so sure. Another memory followed. A dinner party. One of Ethan's rivals had spent months attacking him publicly, then suddenly stopped. No explanation. No warning. The attack simply ended. That same week, Sophia had quietly suggested he stop worrying. When Ethan asked why, she only smiled. Everything would be fine, she said. And somehow it was. At the time, he considered it coincidence. Now it felt like something else, something much larger, something much darker. Memory after memory resurfaced, warnings he ignored, conversations he dismissed, problems that solved themselves, doors that opened without explanation, obstacles that vanished overnight. For years, Sophia had stood beside him while quietly shielding him from dangers he never even knew existed, and he had rewarded her with divorce papers. The realization hit harder than any financial loss. The final report arrives 2 days later. The lead investigator personally delivered it. Unlike the previous files, this one contained only a single folder, read, "Confidential." The investigator placed it on Ethan's desk. His expression was unusually serious. "You need to read this yourself." Ethan opened the folder. The first page contained a detailed profile. Name, Sophia Romano. Age, 38. Family status, confirmed. Ethan's eyes moved lower, then stopped. For several seconds he simply stared, unable to process what he was reading. The words seemed impossible, yet they remained there, unchanged, undeniable. "Solely here to the Romano implied." Ethan looked up. "What is this?" The investigator remained silent. "What does this mean?" "It means exactly what it says." Ethan's pulse accelerated. "No." The investigator nodded. "Yes." The room suddenly felt smaller, harder to breathe in, harder to think. He turned the page. The next section detailed the structure of the Romano organization. Shipping companies, construction conglomerates, security corporations, financial institutions, energy investments, real estate portfolios, private holdings scattered across multiple continents. The estimated value stretched into numbers Ethan had trouble comprehending. The Romano Empire wasn't simply wealthy. It existed on an entirely different scale, and Sophia stood at the center of it, not as a daughter receiving benefits, not as a distant family member, as the future leader, the successor, the woman who would eventually inherit everything. Ethan leaned back slowly. A strange laugh escaped him, not because anything was funny, because the truth was almost unbelievable. All those years, all those assumptions, all those cruel thoughts. He had spent a decade believing Sophia needed him, believing his money impressed her, believing his success elevated her status. Reality was almost humiliating. She had never needed any of it. Not his wealth, not his influence, not his protection. If anything, the opposite had been true. The billionaire real estate king had been standing beside one of the most powerful women in Europe without ever realizing it. And then he threw her away. 3 days later, Ethan arrived at his office to find a black envelope resting on his desk. No return address, no explanation, only a gold seal pressed into the paper. He immediately opened it. Inside was a formal invitation. His eyes moved across the elegant lettering. Romano Holdings cordially invites you to attend the annual International Charity Gala. Location: the Grand Monarch Hotel. Guests: political leaders, business executives, international investors. Special presentation: the future of Romano Holdings. Ethan's gaze continued downward, then froze. Special guest of honor, Sophia Romano. For a long moment, he simply stared at the invitation. His heart pounded. The room was silent. He already knew this wasn't just a charity gala. It was something else, something bigger, something planned. A public appearance, a public announcement. And deep down, Ethan sensed exactly what was about to happen. For weeks, he had been uncovering pieces of Sophia's hidden identity. At the gala, the entire world would finally see it. And for the first time since signing those divorce papers, Ethan found himself genuinely afraid of what came next. Ethan has finally uncovered part of the truth, but the biggest revelation is still ahead. What will happen when the entire world learns who Sophia Romano really is? And how will Ethan react when he discovers the true cost of the divorce papers he signed so confidently? Before we continue, comment below. What do you think Ethan's biggest mistake was? Now let's head into the night that would change both of their lives forever. The Grand Monarch Hotel glittered like a palace. Crystal chandeliers illuminated soaring ceilings. Marble floors reflected golden light. Outside, a fleet of luxury vehicles stretched around the block, while international media crowded behind security barriers. Inside, some of the most powerful people in the world gathered beneath one roof. Politicians, billionaires, corporate executives, foreign diplomats, investment giants. Every invitation had been personally approved by Romano Holdings, and that fact alone ensured nobody declined. Ethan Moretti stood near the back of the ballroom, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. For the first time in years, he felt out of place. The past month had been brutal. Projects continued collapsing. Investors remained cautious. Banks demanded additional reviews. The whispers surrounding Moretti Holdings grew louder every day. Tonight represented an opportunity, a chance to understand what was happening, a chance to salvage relationships, a chance to find answers. But deep down, Ethan knew why he had truly come. Sophia. He needed to see her, needed to understand how the woman he had lived beside for 10 years had become a complete stranger overnight. Around him, conversations filled the ballroom. Yet one subject dominated every discussion: the future of Romano Holdings. Rumors had circulated for years regarding succession. Vincenzo Romano had no sons, no publicly acknowledged heirs, no obvious successor. The question had fascinated business leaders and political analysts alike. Tonight, many believed that question would finally be answered. The lights dimmed slightly. Conversations softened. Attention shifted toward the massive stage at the front of the ballroom. A master of ceremonies stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight." Polite applause followed. Ethan barely listened. His eyes remained fixed on the entrance, waiting, watching. Then suddenly the room became silent. Not because anyone requested it, because something had changed. The massive ballroom doors had opened, and Romano's security entered. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Men and women dressed in dark tailored suits moved into position with military precision. Their expressions remained calm, professional, controlled, yet their presence alone commanded attention. A path formed through the center of the ballroom. The crowd instinctively stepped aside. Every conversation stopped. Every camera turned. Then she appeared. Sophia. For a brief moment, Ethan forgot how to breathe. The woman entering the ballroom looked familiar, and yet completely different. Gone was the quiet wife who stood silently beside him at corporate functions. Gone was the woman his social circle dismissed as ordinary. The woman walking through the ballroom carried herself with effortless authority. She wore a breathtaking black evening gown that flowed elegantly with every step. Diamond earrings caught the light like stars. Her dark hair was styled with simple sophistication. Nothing about her appearance screamed for attention. She didn't need it. Attention followed her naturally. Confidence radiated from every movement. Not arrogance, not pride, certainty. The certainty of someone who no longer needed anyone's approval. The entire ballroom rose to its feet, one by one. Rows of executives, foreign ministers, investment magnates, political leaders. They stood as Sophia Romano walked through the room. Ethan remained frozen. His mind struggled to reconcile the image before him with the woman he thought he knew. The contrast was devastating, because this wasn't a transformation. This was a revelation. She had always been this person. He had simply never seen her, or perhaps never bothered to look. As Sophia passed nearby, she briefly glanced in his direction. Their eyes met for 1 second. 2. Then she looked away and continued walking. No anger, no bitterness, no sadness, nothing. And somehow that hurt more than hatred ever could. The applause faded as Sophia took her place beside the stage. Moments later, another figure appeared. Vincenzo Romano. The room immediately grew still. Even among the world's elite, his presence commanded a different level of respect. The 70-year-old patriarch moved slowly but confidently toward the podium. His silver hair reflected the ballroom lights. His sharp eyes swept across the audience. When he finally spoke, His voice carried effortlessly through the room. "Thank you for joining us this evening." The audience listened carefully. No one interrupted. No one whispered. Even powerful people understood when they were standing before greater power. Vincenzo spoke briefly about philanthropy, business initiatives, international partnerships. Then his tone shifted. The room sensed it immediately. A major announcement was coming. "I have spent many years building Romano Holdings." Silence filled the ballroom. "The time has come to speak about its future." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Around him, countless guests leaned forward, waiting. Vincenzo turned toward Sofia. His expression softened. For the first time all evening, he looked less like a feared empire builder and more like a father. Then he spoke 4 simple words. "My daughter, Sofia Romano." The ballroom fell silent. Completely silent. The kind of silence that exists only when hundreds of people simultaneously stop breathing. Shock spread across the room. Faces froze. Eyes widened. Several guests openly stared. Others exchanged stunned looks. Then the whispers began, quiet at first, then spreading rapidly through the crowd. "My God! His daughter, Sofia Romano. Impossible. That's Ethan Moretti's ex-wife." The realization moved through the ballroom like wildfire. Heads turned toward Ethan, one after another. Investors, executives, politicians. Everyone suddenly remembered the same thing. He divorced her. The billionaire standing alone near the back of the ballroom had publicly discarded Vincenzo Romano's daughter. Humiliation crashed over Ethan like a wave. Not because people were staring, because of what their expressions revealed. Pity, disbelief, amusement. The room wasn't looking at a powerful businessman anymore. They were looking at a man who had made the worst mistake of his life. The event continued, but Ethan barely heard any of it. His attention remained fixed on Sofia. Eventually, he gathered enough courage to approach her. She stood near one of the ballroom's grand windows, speaking with foreign investors. The moment she noticed him approaching, the conversation politely ended. The investors stepped away, leaving them alone. For the first time since the divorce, Ethan stood face to face with Sofia. "You look well," he said. The words sounded weak even to him. "Thank you." Her response was polite. Nothing more. A silence followed. Uncomfortable, painful. Ethan searched for something meaningful to say. Instead, he found himself staring at a stranger, not because Sofia had changed, because he was finally seeing who she had always been. "I didn't know." Sofia studied him quietly. "No," she replied softly. "You didn't." The simplicity of her answer struck harder than any accusation. There was no anger in her voice. No attempt to shame him. Only the truth. For years, Ethan had looked directly at her without truly seeing her. And now, it was too late, because the distance between them felt impossible to cross. She belonged to a world he had never understood, a world far beyond his reach. The ballroom lights shifted once more. Vincenzo returned to the stage. Conversations immediately stopped. The old Mafia boss looked toward the audience. Then toward Sofia. A small smile appeared. "I have one final announcement." The room became silent again. Vincenzo placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder and spoke the words that changed everything. Effective immediately, Sofia Romano will become the official heir and future leader of Romano Holdings. For a moment, nobody reacted. The announcement seemed too enormous to process. Then the ballroom exploded. Gasps, applause, shocked conversations. Media cameras flashed non-stop. Business leaders stared in disbelief. Political figures exchanged stunned looks. Across the room, Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath him, because in that single moment, the entire world learned exactly who Sofia Romano truly was. And Ethan finally understood the magnitude of what he had thrown away. The fallout began before the gala even ended. By sunrise, financial news outlets across the world were broadcasting the same story. Sofia Romano revealed as heir to Romano Holdings. Business analysts discussed the announcement for hours. Political commentators speculated about its implications. Investors reacted immediately, and unfortunately for Ethan Moretti, they reacted badly, very badly. 3 days after the gala, the crisis inside Moretti Holdings exploded. Ethan sat alone in the executive conference room, staring at a screen filled with red numbers. His stock price had fallen another 12%. Several institutional investors had sold significant positions. Analysts who once praised his leadership now questioned his future. The situation worsened by the hour. His phone rang, then rang again. Banks, lenders, financial institutions. The conversations all sounded similar, professional, polite, terrifying. One by one, they informed him that existing loans would be reviewed, credit facilities would be reassessed, additional guarantees would be required. Several lenders demanded immediate repayment schedules. Ethan ended the final call and rubbed his temples. For years, those same banks had competed for his business. Now they treated him like a liability, like a risk, like a man already falling. The collapse accelerated. International partners terminated agreements. Joint ventures dissolved. Major investors withdrew. Projects stalled completely. The empire Ethan spent decades building suddenly felt fragile, like glass beginning to crack under pressure. And every day the cracks spread. The media smelled blood. That made everything worse. Television programs dissected his business decisions. Newspapers questioned his leadership. Online publications published articles with increasingly brutal headlines. Some focused on the collapse of his projects. Others focused on the Romano revelation. One article became particularly popular. The title alone made Ethan furious. The billionaire Wade divorced a dynasty. Millions of people read it. Millions more shared it. For the first time in his life, Ethan became the subject of public ridicule, not admiration, not envy. Ridicule. Everywhere he went, whispers followed. Every interview invitation disappeared. Every social event suddenly became unavailable. Doors that once opened automatically now remained closed. The people who once fought for his attention no longer returned calls. And then Isabella left. The breakup happened inside Ethan's penthouse. Appropriately enough, it lasted less than 10 minutes. Isabella stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Expensive luggage waited near the elevator. Her decision had clearly been made long before the conversation began. Ethan stared at her. "You can't be serious." She crossed her arms. "I am, after everything." A bitter laugh escaped her. Everything. A bitter laugh escaped her. Everything. The word carried surprising cruelty. "You mean the projects that are failing?" Ethan's expression darkened. "This is temporary." "Is it?" Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Isabella shook her head. "I didn't sign up for this." The sentence hit harder than Ethan expected, because he suddenly understood exactly what she meant. She hadn't signed up for a struggle. She hadn't signed up for uncertainty. She hadn't signed up for him. She had signed up for him. She had signed up for success, for power, for status. And now those things were disappearing. "You sound ridiculous." "No," Isabella replied calmly. "I'm being honest." Then she delivered the final blow. "The only reason people wanted to be around you was because you were winning." Ethan froze. The words felt cruel, but deep down he knew they were true. Minutes later, she walked out of the penthouse and never looked back, much like Sophia had. The difference was that Sophia left with dignity. Isabella left with calculation. The days that followed became the loneliest of Ethan's life. His social circle vanished. His business allies disappeared. His romantic relationship ended. Even some longtime friends stopped returning messages. For years, he believed he was surrounded by loyalty. Now he discovered he had been surrounded by opportunity. The distinction mattered. Late one evening, Ethan sat alone in the massive mansion that once felt alive. The silence seemed endless. For the first time, he wasn't distracted by meetings, or deals, or ambitions. He was forced to sit with his thoughts, and that was far more painful. His mind returned to Sophia, again, and again, and again. Not the Sophia introduced at the gala, not the future heir of Romano Holdings, his Sophia, the woman who remembered birthdays, the woman who waited for him during endless business trips, the woman who celebrated his successes before anyone else did, the woman who defended him when others criticized him. She never asked for expensive gifts, never demanded attention, never cared about status. She simply loved him, completely, unconditionally, and for years he had mistaken that love for weakness. A painful realization settled over him. Everyone else had loved what he possessed. Sophia had loved who he was, and he had thrown her away. 3 weeks later, Ethan made a decision. He requested a meeting. To his surprise, Sophia agreed. The meeting took place inside a quiet garden attached to one of Romano Holdings' private properties. No reporters, no cameras, no executives. Only the two of them. For several moments neither spoke. The distance between them felt larger than the space separating their chairs. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I was wrong." Sophia listened quietly. "I should have seen you." No response. "I should have appreciated everything you did." Still nothing. Ethan lowered his eyes. The next words were harder. "I thought success made me better than everyone else." The confession hung in the air. Painful, embarrassing, necessary. "I thought I had outgrown you." For the first time, emotion appeared in Sophia's eyes. Not anger, sadness. Ethan continued. "I was arrogant." His voice weakened. "I hurt the only person who ever truly cared about me." Silence. The garden remained still around them. Then Ethan finally spoke the truth. He had spent months avoiding. "I regret everything." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Not in forgiveness, in understanding. She understood exactly what he was feeling, because she had already lived through it. When she finally spoke, her voice remained calm, gentle, unshaken. "I loved you when I believed you loved me." Ethan closed his eyes. The words hurt because they were true. Sophia continued. "The day you measured my worth by what I could do for your image, our marriage was already over." Silence followed. No dramatic speech, no accusations, no revenge, just the truth. The simplest truths often hurt the most. Ethan looked up. "Is there any chance?" Sophia stood before he could finish. The answer was already clear. For a moment she looked at him the same way someone might look at a chapter they had finally finished reading, with respect, with sadness, but without any desire to return. Then she walked away. And this time Ethan knew she wasn't coming back. Ever. The following morning, Ethan arrived at Moretti Holdings shortly after sunrise. His mood was already dark. The meeting with Sophia replayed endlessly in his mind. But the sight awaiting him in the company lobby immediately erased every other thought. Federal investigators filled the building. Agents moved through reception. Security personnel stood aside. Employees watched in stunned silence. Boxes of documents were being collected. Computers were seized. Legal notices were posted. Ethan stopped walking. His blood ran cold. One of his executives hurried toward him. Panic covered the man's face. "Mr. Moretti." Ethan already knew. The next phase had begun, and this time there would be no one left to protect him. The next 6 months destroyed Ethan Moretti's empire. What began as a government investigation quickly became something much larger. More investigators arrived, more records were examined, more questions were asked. Old transactions resurfaced. Long-forgotten business practices came under scrutiny. Every week brought another headline, another scandal, another problem. Investors fled. Banks demanded immediate action. Board members resigned. Several major projects were cancelled before construction even began. Assets became tied up in legal reviews. Financial partners severed relationships. The momentum that once built Ethan's empire now worked against him, and this time there was nobody left standing behind him. No invisible shield, no hidden protection, no quiet intervention, only consequences. One by one, the foundations of Moretti Holdings crumbled, and once the collapse began, it became impossible to stop. The mansion was the first thing to go. The same mansion where Ethan had slid divorce papers across a polished marble table. The same mansion where he believed he had won. Now strangers walked through its halls during private showings. Potential buyers inspected rooms that once hosted world leaders and celebrities. Within weeks, it was sold. The private jet followed. Then several luxury properties. Then artwork. Then investments. Each sale felt like another piece of his old life disappearing. The company itself survived longer, but not by much. Shareholders demanded leadership changes. Executives resigned. Entire divisions were dismantled. Projects were sold off to competitors. The name Moretti Holdings slowly disappeared from the business world. A company that once seemed unstoppable simply ceased to matter. The media celebrated the downfall. Former allies distanced themselves. Business magazines published stories examining the collapse. Financial analysts called it one of the most dramatic falls in recent corporate history. Ethan stopped reading them. There was no point. The damage was already done. The most painful loss wasn't the money. It wasn't the properties. It wasn't even the company. It was the silence. The complete absence of people who once claimed to care. Friends vanished. Associates disappeared. Contacts stopped answering. The world moved on. Without him. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, another story was unfolding. One built not on collapse, but ascension. The Romano estate had never seen a gathering quite like this. Leaders from across Europe arrived under extraordinary security. Political figures, business magnates, diplomatic representatives, financial power brokers, influential families whose names rarely appeared in public. The ceremony had been planned for months. Everyone understood its significance. The future of Romano Holdings would officially be decided today. Inside the estate's grand hall, generations of Romano history surrounded the guests. Portraits of past leaders lined the walls. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. A sense of legacy filled every corner. At the center of the room stood Sofia Romano, calm, elegant, confident, no longer hiding, no longer pretending to be someone else. For years, she had tried to escape this world. Now she finally stood ready to lead it. Vincenzo Romano took his place at the front of the hall. Age had begun to slow him, but not diminish him. The room immediately fell silent. Every eye turned toward the man who had spent decades building one of the most powerful private empires in the world. His gaze settled on Sofia, and for a moment, emotion appeared behind the legendary composure. Not pride in his empire, pride in his daughter. The daughter who had always chosen integrity over power. The daughter who walked away from privilege in search of something real. The daughter who returned stronger than anyone expected. Vincenzo spoke slowly. His voice carried throughout the hall. For many years, Sofia chose her own path. The audience listened carefully. She never asked for this responsibility. A small smile touched his face, which is precisely why she deserves it. The room remained silent, respectful, attentive. Vincenzo turned towards Sofia, then formally extended his hand. "I am proud to present the future leader of Romano Holdings." Applause erupted throughout the hall. Guests rose to their feet. The sound echoed beneath the high ceilings. For the first time in her life, Sofia accepted the identity she had spent years hiding. Not because of wealth, not because of influence, because she finally understood something important. Power itself was neither good nor bad. What mattered was how it was used, and she intended to use it differently. The ceremony marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the Romano Empire, for Sofia herself. The quiet woman everyone underestimated was gone. In her place stood a leader. Several months later, Ethan sat alone at a small outdoor cafe overlooking a city square. The location was modest, ordinary, the kind of place he would never have visited during his billionaire years. A newspaper rested on the table beside him. A photograph on the front page caught his attention. Sofia, another article, another achievement, another sign of the growing influence she now commanded. Ethan stared at the image for a moment, then folded the paper. There was no bitterness anymore, no anger, no resentment, only acceptance. Some lessons arrived too late. A sudden commotion near the square drew his attention. Several black vehicles had arrived. Security personnel appeared. People paused to watch. Then Sofia stepped from one of the cars. Ethan immediately recognized her. She looked exactly as she had during the succession ceremony. Confident, respected, entirely comfortable within the world that once intimidated her. People greeted her with admiration. Business leaders approached her. Officials welcomed her. Wherever she walked, influence followed. Ethan watched quietly from across the street. He felt no jealousy, only understanding. This was always who she had been. He simply failed to see it. As Sofia prepared to enter a nearby building, she suddenly turned. Their eyes met for one brief moment. The world seemed to pause. Neither spoke, neither moved. Then Sofia offered a small nod. A simple gesture, polite, respectful, nothing more. No invitation, no regret, no second chance, just acknowledgement, a recognition of a chapter both of them had survived. Then she turned away. Surrounded by security, influence, and respect, she disappeared into the building. And Ethan knew he would never see her again. Not truly. That part of his life was over. Forever. Years earlier, Ethan Moretti believed power came from money. He believed loyalty would always remain. He believed Sophia needed him. Reality taught him otherwise. The strongest people rarely advertise their power. Loyalty is priceless, and respect is worth far more than wealth. Sophia Romano never destroyed Ethan's empire. She never sought revenge. She never threatened him. She simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own arrogance. And in the end, that proved more powerful than any act of vengeance ever could. The divorce papers ended a marriage, but they also revealed a truth. Ethan Moretti learned too late. The most powerful person in the room is often the one who never has to prove it. Ethan lost his fortune, his influence, his reputation, and the woman who loved him most. But in your opinion, did he deserve everything that happened to him? And if Sophia had given him a second chance, do you think he truly would have changed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of hidden power, betrayal, and unforgettable consequences, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more dramatic stories just like this one. Until next time, remember, the greatest power is often hidden where no one thinks to look.